The moderator for this session is Miss Juliana Janot, Hey Ambassador representing Brazil. Juliana, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. So welcome to the panel, The Role of Men and the Inclusion of Vulnerable Groups. I'm Juliana Janot, a 17-year-old Brazilian young activist. I'm an ambassador at the Hey campaign, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Construindo Futuro, or CF, an international organization empowering teenagers worldwide to promote sustainable development in their communities. And today we will talk about how to promote inclusion in climate action, how climate change is affecting different groups in different ways. And we will also hear a little bit about the amazing work each of our panelists is making. Today we have three amazing panelists, John Paul Jose from India, Neeshad Shafi from Qatar, and John Francis from the United States. It's really an honor to be mediating this session with you. Just reminding each of you that you have approximately 3 minutes to answer each question so that the panel can finish at the time we are supposed to finish. So let's begin. I'm going to begin by introducing John Paul Jose to you. John Paul Jose is a social, environmental, and climate justice advocate coming from an agricultural family in Kerala, India. Living amid nature and experiencing environmental changes and climate crisis have driven him into taking action with experiences in dozens of organizations as a volunteer, ambassador, advisor, consultant, etc. He's also involved in research, policy, and livelihood-based restoration. So now we come to the question. Environmental injustice or environmental inequality is defined as the fact that some groups are disproportionately affected by climate change, more than the most privileged segments of society. And then there's the concept of climate justice, which is a specific part of climate inequality, but those who suffer the effects of climate change. So, John, can you better explain how do you see these climate injustices, especially about the effects of climate change in rural agricultural communities, for example, in your region in India? And also, how do you see solutions to promoting environmental justice in vulnerable communities?
Thank you, Juliana, and also thank you, Hey Foundation, for having me here. So, coming to the point, India is such a vast and diverse country. It has around 6 climatic zones, then again around 15 agroclimatic regions. And half of the country population is dependent on agriculture. And among that, 80% of them are women, and majority of them are like self-employed women. So when it comes to men, they usually engage in cash crop cultivation, but when it comes to women, they engage mostly in diversified crops. So that's how in Indian agriculture sector we have it. So due to the impact of climate change, we have like the layers in which these things are going to impact. And it also have a colonial continuity, the impacts of colonialism and existing patriarchal and socio-economic insecurities, where women and children have a like less role and more suppressive focus. So during instance of climate change, it's mostly felt by farmers, whether it's women or men. So, but during the situations when the income from the family depletes, then either men move out of home, searching for jobs in cities or other areas, then the household in charge is left to women. So in that cases, we have like giving a vulnerable group something to head on. So women have to focus on 2 things, that is to meet the needs of the family, that is taking care of the elderly, children, and everyone, and also keeping a steady income from agriculture. So that is in question in a changing climate, whether women are like being exposed to a larger area of land to engage in agriculture, and also at the same time to focus on the future of the children and everyone. So in these cases, like they have to keep a balance on both of the things. And also sometimes many men who leave doesn't come back. So everything is left to women. So this injustice unravels in those situations because there are like huge array of money lenders and exploiters they like look at the situations to exploit women, take land from them. So in these situations, the first thing they think about is like keeping the children safe, especially daughters. So some of them are married off instantly, like bringing back the age-old practice like child marriage, and also increasing instances of sexual exploitation, that is selling of girl children, and at the same time also child trafficking and other practices. So climate change in a way is actually bringing back age-old socioeconomic insecurities, which we are trying to move away or keep away from our societies. So that's one of the crucial things which we have in our societies. So how to bring solutions or how to make or avoid this kind of injustice is to have a collective responsibility in meeting our agriculture or rural or gender roles. So rather than leaving everything to women or leaving everything to men, we should have a collective responsibility in the kind of roles which we need to take in. At the same time, farmers are the different blends of the global climate crisis, and also as someone constantly engaged in land for protection and also safeguarding ecosystems and other relevant practices that ensures food security, it's important to have adequate information being sent to farmers, to the rural areas, and invest in education, adaptation, resilience, because once the climate crisis hits, and if there is no any assistance from any external world or anyone, it creates a chain of events like water scarcity, drought, pest attack, movement of people, creating conflict, and also various other socioeconomic insecurities that I mentioned emerging. And also if most of the agriculture families, they have like a financial burden because the loans take up large amount of their investment in the family agriculture educations. So if the land doesn't give the adequate returns, then many farmers have that mental stress and trauma. So they end up in suicide. So again, the land, children, everything is left to women. Otherwise, there are like collective suicide cases. So climate change is in a way is like bringing back existing social issues and also leading to creating or giving more mental distress and stress, especially as a result of have to take this family forward and have to continue to have a hold on the land and have to protect their livelihood and culture in a changing and a demanding society. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan, for sharing such insightful comments. Yes, like there's so much in what you said. I think climate change is really bringing back all these social and economic insecurities. And it's important to really take these inclusive actions so that we not only combat climate change, but we combat its effects on people, right? So you said about it, and I really see that like environmental issues are inextricably linked to human rights. So you said about gender inequality, droughts, conflict, suicide, sexual exploitation, everything coming from like environmental issues. And it's really important to highlight that and how important it is to take action now for the climate to prevent these social things from happening, right? And yes, so thank you so much, John. And now I'm going to introduce Neeshad Shafi. So Neeshad Shafi is from Qatar. He was named in the apolitical lists of the 100 most influential people in climate policy 2019. He's the co-founder and executive director at the Arab Youth Climate Movement Qatar, and he is an expert in climate policy, especially in the Middle East, having a prominent presence at the international climate summits, especially the UN Climate Summit, the COP. And he's a UNEP Youth Regional Facilitator for the Middle East. And he's on the steering committee of the UNESCO Youth Climate Action Network. Thank you for being here with us, Neeshad. And now let's get to the question. We see the effects of inequality in society, with powerful groups and white men usually occupying the majority of decision-making positions. So how to ensure inclusion and representation and include all human groups and minorities in global climate policymaking so that we ensure these climate policies will also be inclusive and not a privilege of specific parts of society. Also, if you could tell us a little bit more about your role and the a presentation of the Arab region on climate action and your work on the Arab Youth Climate Movement, Qatar.
Thank you so much, Juliana. It's an honor to be here and to share some perspective on inclusivity. And that's something very close to me. It's not based just on gender, but also region and the countries which you belong to. Over the years, like my colleague mentioned, John, that the colonialistic approach has made into the climate movement too. Even in the climate discussion, it's always the global North countries taking the lead. And we at the Global South wait for the conclusions to happen to hear what they decide for our future. And this then trickles down to gender. So if you look at the gender perspective, women are again sidelined, even at the negotiation team or the focal point for each country. Women are the least countries have even the focal point as a woman. And now moving further, youth representation. Which part of the world of the youth are more represented? Again, the global North whites and the young people from the Africa, Middle East, and West Asia and South, Global South from Asia are least represented, both on funding perspective or support you receive from corporate or any other organization. And this has been trickled down to even at the UN discussion or negotiation, and also at the youth movements these days. You can see all the youth movement who are celebrated are global North. That doesn't mean that there is no global youth movement in the South or in the Asia or in the Middle East. Of course, the media always shows the white as the savior of the world, where they are the biggest culprit. Even at the youth perspective, they have to make their countries accountable, not dictating us. Because, example, for a sort of some of the climate movement do ask countries to take biggest action. So who has to take it? Coming from China, United States, are the biggest culprit. They should be asking their government rather than dictating our governments, who doesn't even make it to top emitting countries. So there is this disparities at the very, very highest level, and this trickles down to gender, region, and even color. So I see this is going down, and how we can break these barriers are having more representation, supporting indigenous communities, women communities, youth from the global South are the proper way to do it, and making UN responsible for making sure this participation happens at the highest level of discussion. So there have been a lot of work done over the past years to, at least for me, from the MENA region, to have more Arab youth participation, both genders. I've been always very focused on having women and youth on forefront of our discussion. Even if you look at my board is overwhelmed number by women against men. So which I always believe that they have more ideas, more passion or compassion when you talk about climate and environment. And moving to young person, I mean, I'm not anymore teen, but we are trying to bring more teens onto the team who are very aggressive, like yourself, Juliana. We're looking at young who are 18, 19 to join our team, to be our young ambassadors who can, get wisdom and knowledge from what we have been working for the last 5-6 years over our teen to, youth age at the moment. So over the time, I think this is a way forward how NGOs, especially from the Global South, should look into and working to, have more representation within their organization. And what does that do is that replicate to other organizations, and next level is you move them to bigger positions, and that help us to, at least reduce that barriers within your region or within the state. So moving forward, I believe that there is a lot of opportunities for the young people from our region to be a part of this discussion, and you will never get it easy on a plate like how our friends from the global North get it. So we have to demand, and that's the only way forward. So yeah, that would be my opening remarks on the first question. And at Arab Youth Climate Movement, we have been basically pushing for gender and youth participation. And we've been also happy to announce we will be announcing a new grant for Arab youth participation at COP, making sure young Arab youth are also able to attend the climate summits in the coming years here in Sharm el-Sheikh, this year in Egypt, and next year in Dubai, in UAE. So more push for how youth can be participated, and making sure that youth participation is again divided like equally amongst women and men, or young girl and boy. So we've been looking how inclusively we can support, and also looking at if any indigenous communities can be supported. We will be doing that. So I think it's also a responsibility of our NGOs like ours, who've been predominantly working for the last 5-6 years to support the rest of the regions. I mean, we cannot expect the global North to come and support our organizations. So we have to develop sort of solidarity within our region to help each other. That could be a good way to do around. And I think that is also working, because there's a sort of synergy and solidarity within the organizations, from at least from the Global South, in supporting one another.
Thank you so much, Neeshad. Yeah, absolutely. What you said, it's just so true that this inequality is like social inequalities are expressed in different areas in climate action, from this inequality in region that you said about the Global South being excluded. Me coming from Brazil, I also really see this inequality happening, that sometimes it's also another way of making these like global inequalities continue, right? If they take care of the climate policy, which is so important for the definition of the future of the planet, and we need this representation also on the gender perspective and the youth perspective. I really liked the thing you said about making youth delegates on, for example, in decision making. I think it's so important, and making the UN responsible for making this equality happen. So thank you for the insights. And now we'll move on to John Francis. John Francis, also known as the Planet Walker, is an environmental activist. In 1971, Francis witnessed an oil spill in San Francisco Bay. The effects of the oil pollution compelled him to stop using motorized vehicles. Several months later, he took a vow of silence as a protest and spent 17 years without talking. And he walked across the United States without vehicles, also earning his degrees, master's in environmental studies and PhD in land resources. Nowadays, he writes oil regulations for the U.S. Coast Guard and is an ambassador at an initiative at the United Nations Environment Program, and he is a National Geographic Education Fellow. He wrote several books. So what a story, Mr. John. Really impressive to see your effort for the cause. And can you, now moving to the question, can you please explain to us what is the role of each individual in fighting climate change, and how in your story you decided to take these individual actions, such as stop talking, stop using motorized vehicles, and really act in the way that you believe? And what impact did these individual actions have in the environmental advocacy?
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And I want to thank all of you for being here. The Global Youth Network Summit is just amazing. I'm so honored and so excited to be here, because when I started back in 1972 walking after seeing an oil spill, environment was hardly in the consciousness of people in the Americas, and so one of the reasons why I stopped talking is because whenever I talked about environment, I would always get in an argument, and so I just had to just shut up, and I realized I was just going to do it for a day, and I realized I hadn't really been listening, and how important listening was, because we could learn from each other. And that's so I didn't speak for 17 years, and I walked across North America, as you say, getting my degrees and my PhDs, my formal education, but my informal education was just listening to people. And by the time I had reached the other side of North America, I realized something about environment. And environment to me, it was about pollution. It was about loss of species and habitat. And it was about, climate change. But more importantly, and I think you all are hitting on that, it's about people. And people are not just caretakers of the environment. We are part of the environment. So we are the environment. And how we treat each other manifests in the physical environment around us. This is what I discovered. And if we oppress one another, if we exploit one another, if we take advantage of who we are in that way, it manifests in the physical environment, and it comes out as pollution or climate change or loss of habitat, those things. And so environment to me became about human rights and civil rights and gender equality and economic equity and all the ways we as human beings relate to each other. So you have a great job in front of you, a massive job in front of you. And I don't have the answers to how we're going to do it, except we have to include all those things. We have to include all those things. I'm only coming from the saying that how we treat each other is so important. How we treat each other is like the foundation of all the work we have to do. I mean, I can't impress upon you that. I just finished writing a book called Human Kindness, True Stories of Compassion and Generosity That Change the World. And kindness is a part of us. And I think I'm going over my time, and I don't want to.
Don't worry, continue. Yeah.
And so I was so happy to be in Barbados I think it was 1994 on my journey to South America. I sailed by sailboat, and then I walked the length of South America through Venezuela, Brazil, Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. And I spent some time in Antarctica as well. If it weren't for kindness, if it wasn't for the kindness of people, I could not have survived. And all kinds of people on both sides of the political spectrum, both sides of our cultural divides. Kindness is what helps us survive. And I think it's just necessary for us to keep going. I now am just getting to Africa, starting to walk from Cape Town up north through the Rift Valley. And I'm getting a little older now. I'm way older. I was 26 when I started, and now I'm 76. So I'm so happy that young people are taking initiative. I mean, I was 26 when I started walking, and it was kind of lonely. But now I feel so much company with this network. I'm just so pleased, and I hope that I can be part of this for the rest of my life.
Thank you so much, John. Fantastic. Really, I really identify with everything that you said about kindness. Really is the fuel that like makes us survive, and the importance of really taking the climate crisis as also a human crisis, and the way that we treat each other, and it manifests in this physical environment. And I think that's totally true, because just like Neeshad and John were talking, we see these in social discriminations and social inequality be expressed in environmental equality, because they are totally connected. So because of humans not taking care of the environment, not caring about the environment, we see that the environment makes effects on the earth that we humans suffer again, and then inequalities get even higher. So yeah, I think it's so important to take this climate crisis as this climate action as also a social action, and promote inclusion in this process. So thank you so much, John, and congratulations for your work. Really impressive. Really nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I'm going to open for a Q&A with the audience. If someone has a question, Ashley, could you help me? I don't know if those questions were made in this session.
Hi, Juliana. I'm not seeing any questions from the audience as yet.
Great.
Okay.
So audience, feel free to ask any questions if you have for our amazing panelists. But since the audience haven't said anything yet, let's move to the backup questions. So this question now has everything to do what we were talking right now with John Francis, because it says that the movement ecofeminism addresses a parallel that the dominator system that oppresses nature is the same system in which men oppresses women, because of seeing nature and women as a property. So it explains how women has less influence on environmental policy making and greater exposure to environmental hazards. So it's exactly what we just said, right? It's this thing of dominating the other and not collaborating. So in this work for reaching gender and environmental equality, what is the role of men in cooperating for women participation, particularly in the scope of climate action? And I'll leave this question free for any of you three who wants to add something. Answer. John? Okay.
Listen and learn. That's the role of men. Remember Wangari Maathai in Kenya, who planted millions and millions of trees. She had to get men to listen and learn. And for women, not be afraid. Not be afraid, because the change has to happen. It just has to happen, you know. And it for all of us, for me as a African American walking across North America and the United States, you know, we all have our crosses to bear, or whatever it is that are trying to keep us down. We just have to keep going, and don't take for granted some small things that you do. It seems, oh, that's crazy, like walking. I think walking is a wonderful way to influence people and to help with our health, to be out in nature and have nature help. I mean, we're part of nature, and so nature can help our healing. But listening is number one.
Great, thank you, John. Yeah, that's totally true. Now, Mr. Dr. Daisley wants to speak something. You raise your hand.
Yes, thank you very much. I wanted to not only echo what Dr. John Francis said, but I want to share something that I experienced when I was in Brazil. And it's great to meet you, Juliana and Janot. You've done an exceptional presentation this morning.
Thank you.
The importance of collaboration and the importance of putting relationships first. When I was in Brazil, it transformed me from thinking about economic output and seeing individuals as tools to be used to produce for an organization.
I am delighted that I was given the opportunity to present today's feature address. And before I get started,
Ashley, I think your microphone.
And
sorry, Julie.
It's fine, thank you. And I believe that when we begin to see people as people and not as objects, and men see women as, you know, important people within society that has the same rights, the same equality, not just financially, because I hear a lot of conversations about financial equality for women, but what about emotional equality and psychological equality? What about you know, looking into our systems? And because we have an opportunity to have a systems reboot, but we don't want to reboot our system and go back to the way it used to be. We want to reboot our system and start with a new program for not only our young people, not only our women, but also for our men. I heard a lot coming out, and as I give the summary later, you would hear my conclusions as well. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Daisley. That's totally true. And it's really nice that you came to Brazil too, and you could see all of these issues here in my country. And I think that's totally true. Focusing on gender equality in all spheres, not only financially, but really treating women as humans, and not only women, but people of color, indigenous people, all youth, and really all humans, and understand human rights as a basis for our society, right? So really, really nice. And Dr. Neeshad, John Paul, if any of you want to add something, or yeah.
Bom
John?
dia.
Okay.
Bom dia. Tudo bom?
Bom dia.
And so,
You know how to speak Portuguese.
Yeah. And my
Yeah.
walk through Brazil started after I went through Venezuela to Caracaraí, and then through the Amazonas. And I enjoyed it so much because, as you say, you get to see people, and you get to see people as people.
Yeah.
For me, I could see the mountains as I started in North America. Those mountains were the same mountains that I saw in South America, and the people were the same people. We looked different, but we were the same people with the same hearts and the same spirit and the same soul. I was so happy walking across the planet. That's why I guess they call me the planet walker. And my organization, which is to raise environmental conscious, is called Planet Walk. And you can find out more about that at planetwalk.org. But walking is something that gets us to touch the earth, to touch the planet. And I think that's something that we can do, that we all can do. You know, just walk a little more, get out and explore and see who we are and embrace who we are.
Yes, thank you. That's totally true.
I'm just saying, Neeshad, I was just in Qatar, but I was only passing through in an airport, and I was like going, gosh, I'd like to be here. and then I had to get on another plane and fly away.
Nice. Thank you, John. Now, John Paul wants to add some comments on the topic.
Adding to the insightful discussion of both of them, yeah, it's important, like, we have to avoid polarization, because everything we kind of distinguish, like, for instance, like, we already have like global north, global south, then the west, then we have like different approaches, and also distinguishing people based on race, gender, and age. So it only caters to the needs of the patriarchal society. Like, if you 1 or 2% of the population, like rich people, which they created to exploit the rest of us. So they want a dominion over others. So they want like a less inclusive society. So they want to keep movement to one side, because like they doesn't want their voices to be heard. And also they want children to be on the other side, even if the children have scientific potential, as many of them come out and say, like, they have like a decades of experience living in this world, so they can outsmart a child. So these kind of conversations are completely insensible, leaving more ground for polarizations. But for me, it's important to have more inclusivity. For instance, long ago, we had seen how closed we were, like many of us were in vulnerable positions, and how breaking the chains of dominance like opened like a Pandora of opportunities, like new innovations, educations taking place. For instance, everyone have like, some life in their mind, body, or anything. But when we give something, like whether it's information or any skills or anything, it can create like something better for women. Are not just for creating life. It's one of the most powerful like thing which in the world. Like women have the capability to give life to anything, life to new people. But at the same time, the power to change societies, all other things also follows, whether if you provide right information, right platforms and everything. So we have like continue to break the chains, like the four-cornered house. So those used to be positioned women. So many of them have excelled in education, in employment, have contributed wisely to the world. So we need to do the same thing in rural areas, in cities. We need to break away the chains, break women from those confinement spaces. Everyone, all vulnerable groups should be out of that, because like we are not like chained to anything. We are just like free beings in the world. We are not answerable to anyone or anything. As usual, men, women, young people, they all are equal in this world, because the world is not of like just a few people, it's everyone's. Yeah.
Thank you so much, John. I think that's totally true. You said about like not distinguishing people and giving women not just treating women not just with the power, the great power of creating life, but like making women occupy all spaces, have the access to the education, to really reach all spaces and have an equal participation and access, right, to this equality. Yes, really nice. And let me see, Neeshad, if you want to add something, otherwise I can make another question, or you can answer the other question too if you want to.
Excuse me, Julie, there's another
yeah, sure.
in the chat box.
There's questions. There are questions.
Yeah, there's one. It states, what do you suggest advocacy young girls can do right now? How can they take action on advocacy?
Oh, how young girls can take action on advocacy. Great. For the panelists to answer? Oh. Neeshad, do you want to answer this question? Because
there isn't any differentiation between man or girl or boy to be part of any advocacy. I mean, the best thing to do is to join any existing organization, so you'll get some sort of support from the organization, sort of training, etc. And if you're really passionate about advocacy, you can start your own advocacy programs within your community, within the school, within your college, or wherever you are. So I always for me, when I started my career in advocacy, I didn't find an organization, so I had to start my own. But these days, there are too many organizations around you. It's better to join hands, because it will actually amplify your message, because it's a collective noise or collective voice gives you a more leverage when we are pushing for some sort of agenda to bring those voices to the mainstream. So I believe any of the advocacy, no matter which gender you are, which race you are, which religion you are, you can all collectively work with your regional organization. And there are plenty of international organizations who are taking advocacy for girls and boys and young adults, everybody, to join this whole climate movement to be very inclusive. So my advice is look for organization within your region, within your school, or then if you want to have more like a global idea, you can join Yango. There are other organizations which are supporting UNMGCY. There's other organization at a global level which you can join to make sure you can take your advocacy to the next level.
Thank you, Neeshad. That's so true. I think we need to not only talk about the climate action, but really get engaged, right? Start joining these programs so that everybody can work together. So about these organizations, you said she asked, I think, specifically for young people. So other organizations you could join. For example, my organization, you can also search about it. It's named Construindo Futuro. CF, I'll send it in the chat later. We work with young people, usually young people working to promote this sustainable development in their communities, when it's an opportunity. And then we are almost moving to the end of our session, and just adding some comments because we were talking about Brazil and talking also about rural agriculture communities and this inclusion. And I'm going to just give some insights also on what I've been listening from activists, indigenous activists from the Brazilian Amazon. I've been there in the Amazon, and I've seen the effects of climate change there. So the climate change is affecting, and deforestation in general. So we see the importance of representation and decision making. So if in Brazil we had more indigenous people in representation and people who live in the Amazon in representation in the government, we wouldn't have this deforestation we are seeing right now. And with that, we see that their lands, many of the communities' lands are being dried. And then with that, they are having more difficulty to plant. They are not finding as earthworms as they used to find, so that they can't fish as much as they could fish in in the past, so they're losing their culture, and so it's in threat. So climate change is really what we've been talking before. It's affecting human, and it's affecting human rights. So we need to talk about it, and really not only talk about how climate change affects human rights, but how to bring more human rights to climate action and inclusion. So it was really, really nice to be in this panel with you today. It was so much we talked. And yeah, so I want to add open some space if any of you have final thoughts on our conversation until we finish in 4 minutes. No? So I think, John Francis, you want?
Well, during my walk through the Amazon, I had to get permission to walk through the Amazon from Funai, and the indigenous group that guided me through the Amazon, the Waimari Atuwari, were, I guess, dealing with a lot of miners, and there was, I think, a new dam was going up, and their rights, they were having a difficult time just being able to exist, not so much from climate change, but from how people looked at them and how they felt they could be taken advantage of, and how they were oppressed. And so that's it. When I talk about how it's how we treat each other, those things, you know, having the Gayamparos come in at their own will because they want to, and not looking at the rights of the indigenous people who live there. This is kind of the same thing, and I felt that as that happened in North America, and I guess it happens all over the world. And I don't know what the answer is, but I think that, as Neeshad say, that we would, you know, join a group. I think as a group, we can make a difference. So I really appreciate all of you and all the work that you're doing. It's so important. Just continue and, you know, take strength and knowledge and learn from each other as we go forward. We're not going backwards, Dr. Wright. We're going to go forward. We're going to make things better for all of us. So that's my concluding words, and thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, John. Yeah, what you said, it's totally true. And now Dr. Desley wants to say something. You're muted.
Yes, please. Thank you so very much. Obrigado. I wanted to say that, you know, advocacy starts in the home. And one of the biggest lessons that I am learning, just as I learned in Brazil, how fathers treat their children by hugging, just as I learned that it is okay for a male to kiss his son. There are lessons that we can incorporate into the home that can expand our society. We have to understand, in Barbados, we have a saying that it takes a village to raise a child. And every single time I do global work, I see that saying, that the more effective it's because they take that concept into consideration, that I am not my own. My neighbor's child is my child. The things I say to my neighbor's child would affect my children. And we need to come back to that place as a society where we are responsible for each other, where we are our brothers and sisters keeper. I think that we must move away from this self mentality, the ego, me, what I can get, what I can say, how can I get them to listen to me, to how can we come together and make our world a better place. That's why I love this conference. I'm getting the opportunity to hear from a cross section of individuals, and they're young, minus me, minus me. But when you listen to them, you can hear that they have the same passion in their voices. But more than that, they have the actions. And so I want to say that I think advocacy should start in the home. We should empower our young people in the home first. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Desley. That's so true. And yes, we're going to end our session now, and I'm going just to finish with some key takeaways from the session. We talked about this thing of seeing nature and women as a property, and how this leads to inequality, and we need to change this paradigm and see we all as a great human group, right? And we also talked about the participation of youth on climate action, the importance of bringing youth to decision making, joining organizations. Also, we talked about the effects of climate change in agricultural communities, and we talked more. I think the most important thing is about the inclusion of all human groups in climate action. And just like John Francis said, as a group, we can make a difference. And just like Dr. Desley said, society, we are responsible for each other. So I think that's it. Our key takeaway is that we need to think about a we, right? Not an I, not a selfish way, right? There's an African proverb which says Ubuntu, right? Which means I am because we are. So it's not about being selfish. It's about thinking we are one humanity, so like unite as humans, and we are one earth, so unite as earth, we nature as part of the same planet. So I think that's it. We are going to finish our panel. Thank you so much to all the moderators, all the panelists. You were amazing. Thank you, Ashley. Now the microphone comes to you.
Thank you, Juliana, and all panelists for sharing your remarks and being involved today. We really learned a lot. And today's Global Youth Network Summit on Climate Change and its impact on women and children's mental health, I can say, was a great success. The level of exchanges and interchanges was wonderful by all of our panelists and participants. I want to take this opportunity to especially thank our partners, the Clara Lionel Foundation, the Open Societies Foundation, UNICEF, the Lashley Foundation executive team, our interpreters who were present, Mark Media, all media houses that were present, and our awesome attendees, especially our moderators and panelists. At this time, before we go, I'll hand over to the Honorable Dr. Adrian Daisley, Special Envoy and Permanent Representative of the African Union Youth Assembly in the European Union, to share his concluding remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so very much, Ashley. Lashley, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, good afternoon. All protocols having been established, I have the honor of offering a closing summary of the Hague 5th Global Youth Network Summit 2022, themed Women's, Children's, Mental Health, and the 3 panel discussions I will conclude with you. Coming out of our dialogues were some very important observations. We are watching the impact of climate change unfold outside of our very windows. It is undeniable that climate crisis is a threat to everyone's physical and mental health, air, water, food, shelter. Yet some socially and economically disadvantaged groups face the most significant risks because of where they live, their health, their income, language barriers, and limited access to resources. People of color, immigrants, low-income communities, children, pregnant women, people with disabilities, and people whom English is not their native language. They will suffer the worst consequences of climate change. In panel 1, we looked at the understanding of the importance of local population as its vitality for good needs assessment and service planning. The characteristics of the local relevant population, for example, the size, the age, the gender, should be known, including how this drives demand for mental health services in vulnerable communities. Specific groups of people should be identified who are at risk of developing or likely to have mental health outlets, or who may have benefit from targeted action for prevention and to ensure needs are met. You've also discussed today how women's economic empowerment can concretely help to reduce poverty and increase sustainable development by creating innovative jobs and equality. Gender disparities and mental health was also mentioned, in particular, the need for global collaborative approach to mental health and their effects on women and children. Some facts also came out of our dialogue. Despite being common, mental illness is still stigmatized, leading to a reluctant search for help. Half of mental health issues arise before the ages of 14. Depression is twice as frequent in women than it is in men. Men are also affected by poor mental health and is almost identical to women. You also discussed why gender is important. You suggested that gender has to be taken into account when examining community mental health. Gender determines the difference and the differential power of control between men and women and have an impact on the socio-economic determinants of their mental health, their lives, the social position, status, and the treatment in society, their susceptibility and exposure to specific mental health risks. All are affected by mental health. This has come up in all of the panels. Every single one is affected by mental health and manifests mental health, sometimes through depression, anxiety, social withdrawal. Depression is not only the most common in women and women's mental health, but it is also a persistent problem and adds to why women are absent from workplaces. Reducing the over-representation of women who are depressed would contribute significantly to lessening the global burden and disparity in cultural perception of women in the workplace. You also said that when considering mental health, specific risk factors must be included. Economic, social policies need to be put in place to manage prevalence of mental health. Mental health must be normalized that cause sudden disruptive severe changes to income, employment, social capital that cannot be controlled or avoided. Significant increase in gender inequality and the rate of common mental disorders has been recorded. You also said that climate change can impact mental health through several pathways. Extreme weather events are causing post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety and depression. Extreme temperatures also affect moods and worsen behavioral disorders, increase suicide risk, and impact well-being of those mental health issues. You also said that the stress associated with ongoing and anticipated climate anxiety and its impact associated with changing livelihood and social cohesion in entire communities must be considered as well. You talked about deinstitutionalized mental health, the importance of a call to action. You asked government to create policies with women and youth involved, access to free mental health services to be available within communities. You talked also about eco-anxiety, building resilience as a collective and within our community groups. You said it is key to mental health and accessibility. Finding out more about how our services and plans take into action our political policies and how our political policies actually impact our individuals within the communities was also mentioned. The fact that burnout and eco-anxiety can lead to or worsen our mental well-being is a reason enough for us to stand up and take a change and make a change in the face of climate crisis. Now, paying attention to the issues across from activists to environmentalists, to speakers, the leaders is important. Building capacity of support in society was also mentioned. You said that conflict and mental oppression is where, we have abuse of women, we have abuse of disenfranchised groups that are not supported within communities. You mentioned people of color, people of the LGBTQ community, disabled people. And you said that if you're part of a community, then you have a body of support that is necessary to drive change and also to continue support. You also talked about natural green space contribution to the intergenerational dialogue, the value of green spaces in promoting healthy living and well-being, and the process of planning and involvement of our youth. You talked about the role of green spaces to provide environmental benefits through effects on heat, offsetting greenhouse gas emissions, and direct health. As I close, I want to say how blessed it is to be here. Because in the end of our dialogue, you talked about strengthening climate action through women and girls and leading the response through focusing on ethnic minority groups, homeless people. The prevalence of mental health problems must be addressed among the homeless. You talked about the prisoners and and those who are offenders of society, people leading with disabilities, and refugees were also mentioned. You talked about gender bias which occurs and affects how those genders are actually treated by psychological leaders. Gender differences exist in patterns of health seeking for psychological disorder help. Men are more likely than women to disclose problems with alcohol use in healthcare provider. Gender stereotypes regarding proneness to emotional problems in women and alcohol problems in men appear to reinforce a social stigma and constrain help seeking among stereotypes. With that said, human rights must not be forgotten. In line with the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, governments must ensure that their mental health legislation, policies, and plans are appropriate and measured, and that they tackle discrimination against people with mental illness. Also, people with learning disabilities must also be known. We must not treat anyone as less in our society than they are. All human beings have a right, have basic human rights, and they're all entitled to those rights. We must make sure that the educational system teaches those rights. We must make sure that that information is available everywhere. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Honorable Dr. Daisy, I yield the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Dr. Daisley, for providing those concluded remarks. You really showed us and highlighted a comprehensive summary of what was discussed today. And for that, we thank you for being present throughout the whole entire duration of today's activity. And again, on behalf of the Lashley Foundation, the Clara Lionel Foundation, Open Societies Foundations, and UNICEF, we want to express our sincere thanks and appreciation to all those who attended today. This concludes our 5th annual Global Youth Network Summit on climate change and the impact it is having on women and children's mental health. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.